Hello and welcome. This is a recording of a presentation shared with the Directors of Special Education Institute participants in 2022, Foundation for School Success, Building Strong Preschool Programs.
Welcome to Preschool. We're really excited that you're here listening to us today. My name is Andrea Bartholomew. I am the branch manager for school readiness, as well as the state 619 coordinator.
And I'm Bill Buchanan. I'm the Early Learning Advisor for the Office of Special Education and Early Learning.
Today, we're going to discuss 4 objectives. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of state-funded preschool programs, discussing the importance of developmentally appropriate teaching and learning in early childhood classrooms, identifying high leverage practices, and recognizing the importance of partnerships in early childhood settings. Let's get started. In Kentucky, school readiness means every child enters school ready to learn, engage in and benefit from early learning experiences, and promote best child success. In Kentucky, we really enjoy having inclusive programs. We really talk a lot about having programs with children that support students with disability and students without disability. What is state-funded preschool? So state-funded preschool is provided to each local school district at no cost to families for 3 and 4-year-old students who meet targeted enrollment criteria. Those criteria are income eligibility. Those students have to be 4 by August 1st, and the family has to meet an income threshold at 160% of the poverty level. This criteria is based on the family size and is updated every year based on the federal statutes. Another way that students qualify for state-funded preschool is through disability. Students who are 3 or 4-year-old may qualify based on a developmental delay or disability. The student would have to be evaluated by the school system, and the developmental delay or disability be recorded on an individualized education program. As we talked about district eligibility, the districts may decide to enroll non-eligible students. They can serve them under programs such as Title I. They can ask the family to pay a small tuition fee, or they can use general funds in the district. That is all decided at the district level. Districts will receive state funding only for eligible children, though, during our child count systems. They would not receive funding for those non-eligible students. So, as the Director of Special Education, what should you know about preschool? We're going to talk a few things about program operations, some development appropriate practices, curriculum, health and safety, and family engagement. Those are kind of the big 5 things that we'll talk about that as a dose you need to know. So when preschool programs operate efficiently and effectively and are high quality, kids thrive. Their outcomes increase. Research tells us that. So for typical preschool, it's 4 or 5 days a week, half day or full day, the minimum number of teaching days set by the district calendar. So what that means is your program by regulation is only required to serve students 2.5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. However, many of our programs now serve a full day for their students. That 5th day, if you do not have students in the building, is still considered an instructional day because your teachers are there working, and regulation states that they can work towards family outcomes on those days. Lead teachers must hold an interdisciplinary early childhood education certificate. This is the IECE degree. This is like a soapbox for me, so I'm going to try and not step on it today. But the lead teacher in your preschool classroom is a certified teacher, just like a teacher in K-12. They hold dual certification for special education and regular education, and they are considered a fully vetted teacher in the Kentucky Teacher Retirement System. They receive all the same benefits of pay, of insurance, all the things that a teacher in a K-12 setting would have access to. It's really important that we try and hire IECE teachers for our preschool programs as those teachers are trained to understand early childhood and to know how to best serve the 3 and 4-year-old population. One other thing that we talk a lot about is attendance. Daily attendance must be taken, and it must be put into the state's student identification system, which for Kentucky is Infinite Campus. That is the authority. That's where the attendance is maintained. Families need to be contacted if the child's absent 4 or more days. If your program is blended with Head Start, they have a stricter 3-day policy, but that's something that's important, is to make those connections, because we know that absenteeism and truancy, all of those things, those habits begin in early childhood. If we can work with our families to make sure the kids are coming, make sure that they know they're wanted in the school system, that may help to support as they move on through the grades with their absenteeism. Again, talking about teachers in this, professional learning for teachers. So, PD, things that you create. Now we know that everyone has to go through those standard PDs for the districts. Bloodborne pathogens. If it's icky, sticky, and not yours, don't touch it without gloves. There, I trained you. So if we have different PDs that you must go through for your school district, that's fine, but we want the majority of their training to be related to young kids, to early childhood, to family. It's really important that our teachers are not looked at as an extra person that has to just sit through a random 8th grade math training that's not going to have any, any point in their teaching lives. So making sure that the early childhood is a component in your professional learning is super important, and they have to participate in the same number of days or hours as lead teachers in the K-12 system, because they are just the same as a K-12 teacher. Typically that's 24 hours. We also have a requirement that our assistant teachers participate in 18 hours of professional development, again, with a majority of that being early childhood focused. And of course, for the safety of our staff and students, there must be one person who is trained in CPR in the building. That is one of our regulations. All right, let's talk a little bit about developmentally appropriate practices. This is something that's been around, this thought process of developmentally appropriate practices, for a very long time. And we know it as good teaching. We know it as good program setup, good operation. That starts with the maximum group size of children is 20 in a preschool classroom. You think about a preschool classroom, a kindergarten classroom, maybe a 1st grade classroom. Those should be smaller classroom sizes, because those kids need more attention, especially the 3s and 4s. A 3-year-old can get themselves into a pickle pretty quickly. And if you don't have adequate supervision and a low number of students, you can find yourself in a world of hurt. So we need to make sure that 20 children is our maximum group size by regulation. You need to consider that number if you have a group of students who may have more significant disability. If you have students who have physical disability that may need a wheelchair or a walker, they may need more space. So you may need to consider, okay, maybe this classroom should be capped at 15 because of the needs of the children. That's what we should be considering. And the classroom ratio is always 1 adult to 10 children. That ratio must always be maintained. And whether you're going to the restroom, buses, going outside, always 1 to 10, 1 adult to 10 children. It is imperative that we keep that for the safety of our students. So one thing that we like to look at with our programs is development appropriate experiences in cognitive, communication, social, physical, emotional development, and creative expression. These are 3 and 4-year-olds. Play is their work. Play is how they learn best. Research tells us that. Our own lives tell us that. 3 and 4-year-olds are not meant to sit in chairs and write handouts or do worksheets. They're meant to play and explore through all of their sensory system. They are encouraged to solve problems with their hands, listening, smelling, seeing, using all of their senses to really solve those problems, initiate activities, experimenting, questioning. Those conversations that happen in the block area. about buildings, how we balance things, how, the leverage that you have to make that pendulum swing. Those kind of big concepts are broken down in play so our kids can understand them. Really should have a balance of activities, indoors and outdoors, small groups, large groups. We have a lot of things that are initiated by teachers, but we also want to have things that are initiated by children. So, example, when I was in the classroom, we had a curriculum, we had it set, we always went through it. But if my kids in my classroom were showing interest in something outside of that curriculum, I would explore that. So dinosaurs were not part of our curriculum. 3 and 4 year olds love dinosaurs. So I would make sure that at some point we would put books or toys or different materials in our areas and our centers around dinosaurs so that we could have those conversations that the children wanted to have and wanted to learn about so they could feel invested in their education. So districts need to select developmentally appropriate curriculum and assessments. All curriculum decisions are made locally. The state does not have a curriculum that we require you to use for preschool programming. We'd like for them to align with the newly revised early childhood standards. There's a link there that will take you to those. If you've not been to the Governor's Office of Early Childhood webpage to see those new standards, those revised standards, they're really, really user friendly. They used to come in this big giant binder that you'd have to flip through to find things. Now they're all online. They're set up in very, very user friendly format. And they were revised to kind of update some language and update some things like a technology standard was added and some approaches to learning. The assessments that are used in early childhood programs, you must have a continuous assessment that you use throughout the school year to monitor your students' outcomes. It must be developmentally appropriate, and then you cannot use it to restrict entry or exit from the preschool program. So if a kiddo is eligible and they do the continuous assessment and they do not do well on it, or they score very low on it, you cannot say, well, maybe they're not ready for preschool. That's not how this works. If they're eligible, they get to come to school, and they get to be taught to hopefully increase those outcomes. We do have a new assessment system for the state process. This used to be known as the KED system, the Kentucky Early Childhood Data System. Now we are using what is called the Child Outcome Summary, the COS process. And that is something that we use for federal reporting, as we will use it as well for some state data. But if you have questions specifically about the COS process, my information is at the end of this presentation. Please feel free to reach out. Okay, so we want to make sure that we maintain a healthy and safe environment. These are 3 and 4 year old students. These are parents' babies, right? We want to make sure that we're providing a safe space for these children to be in. The materials that you use have to be in good condition, including your playgrounds. Making sure that your playgrounds are not too big for these kiddos, for these 3 and 4 year olds to play on, making sure that they're not going to get hurt in the classroom if something has a sharp edge or a sharp corner, making sure that we have appropriate places for these students to work and to play. The program provides instruction with bus protocol as well. And we do training such as bus evacuations. We do fire drills, tornado drills, earthquake drills, active shooter drills. And those are things that you have to make sure you are explaining to your students in a developmentally appropriate way. Those can be scary for 3 and 4 year olds, so making sure that they're ready and prepared for an emergency is really important. We also receive information, our students also receive information about health and nutrition. They are taught how to eat healthy and what good things they can do with their body. We do a lot of movement in preschool, a lot of shaking your sillies out, but it's also making your body healthy. A lot of working towards students understanding nutrition and helping them to make healthy food choices. We do a lot of parent instruction with that as well. Teachers will provide supervision during meals. We like to have family style meals in preschool. Now, that used to be passing around serving dishes. Of course, with COVID, that's not necessarily appropriate any longer, but sitting and talking with students during mealtime is part of our instructional day. That is something that is really important and vital to our kids, to have that social interaction with an adult during a meal. It helps for them to have a solid relationships with the adults in their lives. It helps them develop their language skills, problem solving, how to open their milk carton, how to open their fruit package. So there's things that during mealtime that you can really extend the classroom into. So the preschool staff that builds trust and caring with our families. Family is a huge part of the preschool program. The preschool program was built on family engagement because we know that our parents, our families, our caregivers are our students' first teachers. And we get them into our programs when they are so young. Typically, the only person, unless they've been in a childcare setting, the only adult they've had in their life is their caregiver, being mom or dad or granny or grampy or auntie or uncle. Things that adult is the person who has been teaching them. And so we want to engage with that family and say, okay, family, how can we best serve your student? It is required that we have home visits in our preschool programs. We want to make sure that our staff are making those connections early and often. We want our parents to volunteer. Again, COVID restrictions have kind of taken this away a little bit. It is coming back. I think we've noticed some of that. Having family engagement activities, having parent volunteers in your classrooms again, those are really important. And you also want to make sure that when you're doing these family engagement, you take into consideration the different types of structures of our families. It is no longer the norm to have a mom and a dad and 2.5 kids. We have all kinds of different structures of families. We have adoptee families, we have foster families, and we have students growing up with great grandparents, grandparents, other relatives. So we need to make sure that we are being conscious and making decisions to provide information around a variety of family group types. All right, I think I'm going to pass it over to Bill now.
Thanks, Andrea. And next, we're going to talk about recommended practices for young children. And as a director of special education, as a preschool coordinator, it's important to know what these recommended practices for young children are so that you can provide the best possible support to students with disabilities and their families. The recommended practices were first developed by the Division for Early Childhood, DEC, back in the 90s, and the first set of practices included more than 400 different behaviors. Throughout the 90s and the 2000s, DEC revised this set and began establishing the evidence base for these recommended practices through an extensive literature review. In 2014, in collaboration with the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, the practices were revised again, and they were refined and streamlined down to a total of 66 practices. And then these practices themselves were organized into 8 domains: assessment, environment, family, instruction, interaction, leadership, teaming, and transition. The purpose of these practices is to provide teachers, practitioners, and families with ways to improve learning outcomes for young children who have or who are at risk of having developmental delays or disabilities. And it's important to note that these recommended practices also align with NAEYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children's position statement on inclusion, access, participation, and support. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. The recommended practices are research-based, and they can be delivered in all settings. And so it's important to know that there are these sort of three main areas. Uh, as mentioned earlier, there was this joint statement issued by DEC and AC about the meaning and the role of inclusion in early childhood settings. When we talk about access, this means a wide range of learning opportunities, activities, settings, and environments, and it can take many different forms and occur in various contexts. And that can include preschool, Head Start programs, and childcare settings. Participation is about engagement in the learning environment with appropriate individualized supports. And some children may need additional individualized accommodations and supports to fully participate in play and learning activities that Andrea was describing earlier. Support, administrative supports for staff include things like access to professional development and support for collaboration. This is an infrastructure of systems, system level supports that must be in place to support the efforts of individuals and organizations providing inclusive early childhood services to children and families. In today's presentation, we're going to focus on two domains, leadership and instruction. Next, we're going to talk about leadership. And leaders establish the conditions that are essential for success. As a director of special education, as a preschool coordinator, you create the conditions under which teachers and practitioners implement best practices, best instructional practices. You create the stage for success in your schools and in your communities. And this includes creating a culture and climate in which teachers and staff can be successful. You support shared decision making. You take a collaborative approach to how decisions are made. You develop and implement evidence-based professional learning for practitioners. And so it's really important to become familiar with best practices and developmentally appropriate practices for preschool. And you create collaborative systems for service delivery and community-wide screening and child find activities. This is what it means to be a leader. And next we'll talk about instructional practices that are intentionally designed to maximize learning. And so instructional practices are the cornerstone of early intervention and early childhood special education. These practices inform what to teach, when to teach, and how to evaluate the effects of teaching, and how to support and evaluate the quality of teaching. It creates the foundation, right? The foundation to early intervention and early childhood special education. I'm going to focus on a couple of the strategies based on child-specific needs, and these include things like naturalistic instruction. This might, for example, involve an early interventionist interviewing a family about routines that are difficult for the child, and say in the home setting, and what skills might be needed in order to engage in those routines more independently. Embedded instruction might involve a preschool classroom team that identifies logical and appropriate opportunities for children to practice and learn targeted skills during a given routine. And that might be an example of an embedded instructional strategy. Systematic instruction, this might involve where a preschool teacher, an early interventionist, and a child's parent are working together. They might develop a checklist of steps involved for solving, say, a particular task or performing a particular task. And what is the systematic approach to that? Peer-mediated strategies might involve teaching a child's peers, the other kids in the classroom, certain skills like turn taking. And then when the child and the other children play together, the teacher would monitor and then reinforce those skills without necessarily disrupting the activities and the interactions. Explicit feedback and consequences might involve a preschool teacher observing a student's actions, say during circle time, and then make positive and descriptive comments in order to sustain or elaborate on that child's engagement. So again, we would encourage everyone to take a close look at those practices. And in the course of this presentation, we have focused on instructional practices and leadership. Next, we're going to talk about the importance of partnership and the role partnerships play in early care and education. State-funded preschool programs exist within a network of services, basically within a mixed delivery system that includes First Steps, Head Start, child care, and other early care and education partners. Good relationships with early care and education partners are essential for student achievement and student well-being. In this presentation, we're going to focus on two partners, particularly First Steps and Head Start. So we'll begin with First Steps, and First Steps and preschool need to work together to ensure smooth transitions. First Steps is a system of coordinated supports, strategies, and services to promote child's growth and development in the early years, those critical early years. Um, and they work on effective transition between Part C, First Steps, and Part B. And then family engagement is the key to effective transition. So consider promoting family involvement in all facets of transition planning. And that might include involvement in boards and councils that highlight transition-related issues and practices. Notifications and referrals are required too, and transition meetings must be held no later than 90 days prior to the third birthday and not more than 9 months before the third birthday. So, just one more thought about that with respect to First Steps. Um, when you're having transition meetings, uh, consider inviting the Part C representative to that initial IEP meeting if requested by the parent, and consider the IFSP when developing that initial individual education plan, the IEP. Next, we'll talk about Head Start, and school districts each year must achieve full utilization with Head Start. And this is required in the by state-funded preschool programs to work in partnership with Head Start to serve as many at-risk 4-year-olds as possible. So a little bit about Head Start. Head Start promotes the school readiness of young children from low-income families through agencies in their community. 10% of Head Start's enrollment must include children with disabilities. So it's essential that school districts and Head Start programs work collaboratively uh, with Child Find to identify children with disabilities and ensure that Head Start is meeting its federal requirement of serving 10% of their enrollment with children with disabilities. Getting to know your Head Start's program, the program's value to the community can support families and improve the timely delivery of evaluations and services. Head Start is a critical partner in the provision of special education services. And each year, school districts must enter into full utilization agreements with Head Start programs. There are many parts of the full utilization agreement, and including service coordination to support students with disabilities, as well as ensuring that as many at-risk 4-year-olds are identified and referred to the Head Start program as possible. Certainly there's an agreed upon number between the Head Start program and the school district, but the goal here is to support Head Start with achieving full utilization. Districts may contract with Head Start to provide IDEA services, or they may provide those services at the local school district. So again, Head Start is a critical partner in this work. So that, I believe, concludes our presentation. This is our team. Um, Feel free to contact us if you have additional questions about the state-funded preschool program. With that, I'll turn it back over to Andrea.
Thanks, Bill. So as Bill said, that's our larger team, but here's mine and Bill's contact information, and we are happy to help and to support you. That is why we have jobs at the Department of Education. So please feel free to reach out anytime you need. Thanks so much.